Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Hami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says regional countries are trying to facilitate the peace process in Afghanistan to avoid a civil war. He was addressing a press conference along with Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev during his two-day official visit to Tashkent. In his remarks, the Uzbek president said his country wants to strengthen economic partnership with Pakistan. The two also signed multiple agreements in several areas, including trade and tourism. Kabul claims the Taliban have offered a 3-month ceasefire in exchange for prisoners to be released. The government says the insurgents also asked for the removal of their leaders from a United Nations blacklist. In a briefing, Kabul's negotiator Nadin Nadri termed the proposal a big demand. Lebanon's Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri has stepped down, plunging the country deeper into a political crisis. The resignation comes after President Michel Aoun rejected the cabinet lineup proposed by Hariri. He was tasked with forming the government last year in October. In Germany, at least 42 people have died and dozens more are missing due to severe floods in the western part of the country. Authorities have declared an emergency as the floods swept away cars and caused buildings to collapse. It follows record rainfall in parts of Western Europe that has caused major rivers to burst their banks. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says regional countries are trying to facilitate the peace process in Afghanistan to avoid a civil war. He was addressing a press conference along with Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev during his two-day official visit to Tashkent. Khan called for strengthening land and air connectivity with Uzbekistan and said both countries will benefit from their improving trade ties. He stressed the Trans-Afghan Railway project is of paramount importance for the two sides. In his remarks, the Uzbek president said he had constructive talks with Prime Minister Khan on different matters of mutual concern. Mirziyoyev said his country wants to bolster economic partnership with Pakistan. The two sides also signed multiple agreements in several areas, including trade and tourism. Earlier, Khan was presented a guard of honor at the presidential palace. A large delegation of government officials and businessmen is also accompanying him during the visit. Moving on, the Afghan government claims the Taliban have offered a 3-month ceasefire in exchange for prisoners to be released. The government says the insurgents also asked for the removal of their leaders from a United Nations blacklist.
In a press briefing, Kabul's negotiator Nadir Nadiri termed the proposal a big demand. The Taliban have not commented on this statement yet, but earlier the group welcomed the British Defence Secretary's remarks that London will work with the Taliban should they come to power. In a tweet, spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the Taliban are committed to international principles and will not allow Afghan soil to be used against any country. Meanwhile, a high-powered Afghan government delegation is set to resume talks with the Taliban in Doha. The delegation includes the head of Afghanistan's Reconciliation Council, Abdullah Abdullah, and former President Hamid Karzai. Pakistan's information minister said Islamabad will also host an Afghan peace conference. Prime Minister Imran Khan held a telephonic conversation with former Afghan President Hamid Karzai.
And for more on this, we have with us Mr. Einar Tenjin from Beijing. Mr. Tenjin, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Firstly, the regional countries around Afghanistan seem to be taking the lead in brokering peace, with Russia, China and Pakistan offering facilitation in particular. So does that mean that the US-led effort has completely failed and become irrelevant?
Well, it's failed and become irrelevant, but remember, the United States broke Afghanistan. It's now leaving the cleanup to the regional players. It's a highly unstable situation. The U.S. has invested $2 trillion directly and will cost in total about $4 trillion. So walking away is defeat. But strategically, there are people in Washington who are saying we're going to put this mess on Russia, China, Pakistan, and all the rest of the surrounding neighbors' plate. So right now it has become a regional issue, and it's going to have to be settled that way.
So, Mr. Tenjin, why has former President Hamid Karzai sprung into a leading role all of a sudden after staying in the shadows for a good while?
Well, quite frankly, they were uncertain about what was going to happen in terms of the actual timing. But now, as it becomes clear that the Taliban, or the collection of entities known as the Taliban, are closing in, I think he is trying to figure out some way in which he can plead the case, not only for himself, but also for the rest of his administration. Otherwise, there's a oncoming bloodbath that could occur.
Mr. Tenjin, Pakistan already houses over 3 million Afghan refugees. More are spilling over into Tajikistan amid the ongoing fighting. Don't you think so that should the UN not be proactively handling the refugee situation instead of being a reactionary body?
Well, what the United Nations should be doing and what they're actually doing is being hamstrung by players, especially the United States, who is not interested in doing anything more on this particular issue. As I said, they are strategically happy that they have left their mess on everyone else's plates. Getting the United Nations involved is not going to be on the top of their priority right now. Biden is interested in the upcoming elections next year, so he can get enough traction and votes for his domestic agenda. The international agenda, what happens to the Afghan people, what happens to the area, whether or not this spins out of control, it seemingly is not any concern of his administration.
Mr. Einar Tenjin, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, Pakistan's Foreign Office says a two-day peace conference on Afghanistan will be held in Islamabad on Saturday. At a press briefing in Islamabad, spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Afghan delegations will start arriving in the country on Friday. He said peace spoilers should not be allowed to exploit any security vacuum in Kabul. The spokesperson said peace in Afghanistan is in Pakistan's interest. To a question, Chaudhry said Islamabad wants to reopen the Chaman-Spin-Boldak border with Afghanistan. In Pakistan, 2 troops have been martyred as terrorists carried out an IED attack in Balochistan's Pasni district. In a statement, the military's media wing said a search operation is underway to apprehend the perpetrators. Pakistan Army says such cowardly acts cannot sabotage the hard-earned peace and prosperity in Balochistan. It noted inimical elements carry out these attacks backed by hostile intelligence agencies. The army says security forces are determined to neutralize such nefarious designs at all costs. On the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Forum in Dushanbe, the meeting between Chinese and Indian foreign ministers has ended without any breakthrough over border tensions. More in this report.
Chinese State Councillor Wang Yi said Beijing is not responsible for the tussle in the Ladakh region. He pointed out that China-India ties are still hovering at a low point. Meanwhile, Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said a unilateral change of status quo at the border is not acceptable. He said the friction remains unresolved and prolonging the dispute is negatively impacting ties. At least 20 Indian soldiers, including a colonel, were killed last year trying to claim an area on the line of actual control. Thousands of soldiers have been in a standoff ever since, as multiple rounds of talks continue to fail.
Moving on, Lebanon's Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri has stepped down after his latest proposed cabinet lineup was rejected by the president. This has further plunged the country deeper into a political crisis besides an economic meltdown. Hariri told reporters that a consensus was not reached on forming the cabinet in a meeting with President Michel Aoun. Hariri has been at odds with Aoun over the size and the distribution of a new government. He is the second candidate to fail at forming a government in less than 12 months. Lebanon has been without a government since then Prime Minister Hassan Diab resigned following last year's Beirut port blast that killed over 200 people. The country's economic crisis has pushed more than half of its population into poverty and devalued its currency by about 90%. The U.S. says Iran has requested time until the presidential transition to return to the Vienna talks. The State Department says Washington is interested in a mutual return to the 2015 nuclear deal. More in this report.
A State Department spokesperson warned that the offer will not be on the table indefinitely. This comes amid reports that Iran is not prepared to resume talks until President-elect Ebrahim Raisi's administration inaugurates. Earlier, the State Department said Washington is allowing Tehran to use funds frozen in South Korea and Japan to settle debts. It said Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed an earlier waiver and has extended it for 90 days. The department also made it clear that the waiver does not allow for the transfer of any funds to Iran. South Korea and Japan hold billions of dollars in assets from Iran that have been stuck due to U.S. sanctions.
And to talk more about this, we are joined by Hamid Raza Ghulamzadeh from Tehran. Mr. Ghulamzadeh, thank you for your time at Indus. First of all, how is the new administration in Tehran different from President Rouhani's government, and how can it impact the Vienna talks?
Regarding the Vienna talks, the foreign policy of the country is not going to drastically changed by the change of the government, because it is usually decided in Supreme National Security Council, and that is a body, an entity formed by the government and some other individuals and other officials from different parts of the branches of power, like Parliament and the others. And it's not going to change drastically regarding the strategy and the goals of the foreign policy. But of course, the tactics can change from one government to the other one, and the negotiation teams can change, and each negotiator and each diplomat might have his or her own points of views and strategies and let's say methods of discussing the issues. But anyway, it doesn't seem that it's going to be much change from the Iranian side.
Mr. Ghulamzadeh, at the end of the sixth round, negotiators from both the sides said they were returning home for final deliberations. So what can be expected from the next round?
Iranian Foreign Ministry released we can say its final report on the JCPOA to the parliament just a few days ago. And based on that, which talks about the conditions discussed in Vienna, it doesn't seem that to be a practical and signable deal in Vienna. Because Iran had said that, the leader here in Iran had said that all the sanctions need to be lifted. But what we are saying in the deal is that the Americans are talking about keeping hundreds of sanction designations in place, first of all. And second of all, they are not lifting the sanctions. They are not even stopping the sanctions. They are just stopping implementing some of the sanctions. They are still in place, but they say that we are not going to implement them. There are some sanctions like the visa or CAATSA in the Congress, and then the Americans are not going to negate them or they're not going to stop them. They're just trying to have some measures to circumvent them. So it's not lifting the sanctions. It is not something that Iranian side can accept. That is the discussions actually here in Iran on this side of the deal.
Mr. Hamid Raza Ghulamzadeh, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now moving on, Israel has demolished 11 Palestinian houses in the Bedouin community of Al-Kaboun in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian media said soldiers also seized tractors, water tankers and solar power units belonging to the community. Meanwhile, in a village near East Jerusalem, Israeli soldiers demolished a barn and handed demolition orders to 2 others, while illegal Israeli settlers shot a Palestinian shepherd near Madama village, south of Nablus city. Colonia settlers also cut 150 Palestinian-owned olive trees in Boden village. The United States has warned Egypt not to target rights campaigners after the indictment of a prominent activist. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the issue would be a factor in arms sales to the ally. In a statement, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said Washington is concerned about the worsening rights situation. Price said continued detentions and harassment of civil society leaders, academics and journalists have raised concerns. He noted that the executive director of the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, Hussam Baghat, was also targeted. Baghat faces a trial for insulting the Egyptian Election Commission in a tweet. The South African government says it is planning to increase tenfold the number of soldiers deployed to curb the ongoing violence. Defense Minister Nosibe Mapisa says the government has requested the placement of 25,000 troops. She said the troops will be positioned in the hotspots of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces. Meanwhile, the Mines and Energy Ministry has urged people not to panic buy and hoard fuel. The country's biggest refinery in Durban has temporarily shut down, and the movement of petroleum products is disrupted by the unrest. In a statement, the ministry said it has issued regulations prohibiting the sale of petrol and diesel into containers. Around 117 people have been killed and over 1,200 arrested since protests started against former President Jacob Zuma's arrest. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Brazil's daily COVID-19 tallies have climbed to a worrying point. The Latin American country registered more than 1,500 deaths and over 57,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Now, globally, the coronavirus caseload has surpassed 188 million, while the death count is over 4 million. More in this report.
As the Delta virus sweeps the world, even the countries with the most successful vaccine drives are witnessing a surge in new cases. The infections curve in the United States is rising again due to the fast-spreading variant, lagging vaccinations and July 4th gatherings. In Latin America, the devastation continues, with a strain being discovered in Mexico as well. Meanwhile, Argentina has become the 5th country in the region to surpass 100,000 deaths.
It's not just the pandemic drowning us in this country. There is also this huge economic crisis. Many relatives call us crying, not only because of the death, but because they don't have the money to be able to give a burial as a person deserves. We place ourselves in their shoes and we have to act as psychologists to these people.
Over in France, clashes between protesters and police have resurfaced over fresh restrictions. This comes just a day after Amnesty International accused Greece of using the pandemic as an excuse for banning protests. Meanwhile, thousands again took to the streets in Athens to protest the mandatory vaccination rule for workers. Spain has also announced new restrictions to control the latest surges propelled by the Delta variant.
I begin by analyzing the epidemiological situation. The ascending tendency that we warned over last week is still going on. Infections rising from 225 cases per 100,000 people in the last 14 days to 469 cases recorded today.
The World Health Organization has warned that the Delta variant and low vaccine availability make surging cases in the Middle East potentially catastrophic. Meanwhile, in Tunisia and Myanmar, oxygen shortages amid severe outbreaks and overstretched healthcare systems have created a serious crisis.
Pakistan has reported more than 2,500 COVID-19 cases overnight, the highest tally in over a month. This has pushed the caseload over 981,000. The Health Ministry has recorded 47 new deaths in the last 24 hours. The death toll has crossed 22,600. Officials said more than 2,300 infected people are in critical condition, while more than 916,000 have recovered from the disease so far. The ministry's data shows that more than 21 million vaccine doses have been administered so far, and over 4.2 million people have been fully vaccinated. Pakistan and New Zealand have renewed their pledge to enhance cooperation in various fields. Virtually addressing the fourth session of the bilateral political consultations, both sides noted the importance of high-level visits for improving bilateral ties. During his address, Pakistan's East Asia Pacific Director General Amir Ahmed Atazai reiterated Islamabad's resolve on ensuring economic and regional security. In a statement, the Foreign Office said Atazai also briefed New Zealand on Pakistan's efforts in its fight against terrorism. It said he underscored the importance of peaceful resolution of outstanding disputes in South Asia under international law and the United Nations Security Council resolutions. The two sides enjoy cordial and cooperative relations based on mutual trust and understanding. At least 42 people have died and dozens are missing following severe flooding in western Germany. Authorities have declared an emergency as the floods swept away cars and caused buildings to collapse. Hundreds of troops have been deployed to help stranded residents. It follows record rainfall in parts of Western Europe that has caused major rivers to burst their banks. 2 people have also died in neighboring Belgium, while the Netherlands has also been badly hit. The weather services forecast heavy storms with continuous rains until Friday evening. In the Netherlands, prominent crime reporter Peter de Vries has died just over a week after being shot in Amsterdam. The attack sparked widespread condemnation, with Europe's top official Charles Michel calling it an attack against their values. De Vries first shot to fame for his inside reporting on the kidnapping of Heineken millionaire Freddie Heineken in 1983. De Vries had been a frequent commentator on crime programs and a veteran reporter with sources in both law enforcement and the underworld. In the past, he received death threats from the criminal underworld in connection with several cases. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has vowed to track down the perpetrators and bring them to justice. In France, the Bastille Day celebrations wrapped up with a fireworks display in Paris. The day marks the end of absolutism and the birth of the constitutional monarchy in France. More in this report.
The show took place around the iconic Eiffel Tower landmark, which was lit up in the colors of the French national flag during the display. Earlier in the day, thousands of military personnel paraded by foot on vehicles and aboard jets over Champs-Élysées Avenue.
It was the first time we came to Paris, and they thought it was the perfect time to show us what Paris is like, because there was the show. And we thought, wow, a show, we will get to see Paris lit up and all.
This year marked the return of the traditional military parade after last year's celebrations were replaced by a limited access event due to the COVID-19 crisis. It was the first time since the end of World War II that France had not held the military parade.
I think it is good for everybody to maintain the fireworks show despite the COVID-19 situation. It allows people to get together. It is a well-known event and of nationwide importance that it gathers people together. I think it is really important, and it perfectly ends this beautiful day.
French celebrations of national unity falls on the anniversary of the 1789 storming of the Bastille fortress in Paris, the turning point in the French Revolution.
In Britain, the inventor of a jet suit that lets its wearer fly like an Iron Man has unveiled his newest electric-powered suit. More in this report.
Richard Browning, founder of Gravity Industries, says switching from jet fuel to an electric-powered suit will push the limits of what is possible. He says the suit has enough power to run a number of houses.
Suit has enough power to run a small street of houses. It is phenomenal how much energy you need in a small form factor to get a human off the ground, and it really just brings home how much energy you have in gasoline or diesel or those fuels. So we're getting there. It'll only ever get better.
It has previously been tested by the paramedics in England's remote regions to get them to people in distress faster. The company has also demonstrated its suits to the Royal Marines to test how they can assist in maritime boarding operations.
Yeah, so military and search and rescue, they are new applications, but no, they're very real. We've done enough exercises with both of those groups now in a variety of countries to prove that there's actually a really powerful role for the equipment. So yeah, watch this space.
Gravity Industries was launched in March 2017 with founder Browning demonstrating his jet suit all over the world. The suit can hit speeds of over 128 kilometers per hour and is capable of reaching an altitude of 12,000 feet.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Lows and the highs of the business world now. China's GDP has expanded 12.7% year-on-year in the first half of 2021. Official data shows that GDP grew around 8% in the second quarter from the previous year. China's National Bureau of Statistics says the GDP expanded 1.3% on a quarterly basis. The NBS noted Beijing's exports and imports are likely to maintain a relatively fast growth this year. However, it faces big pressure on employment. Meanwhile, China's industrial output also grew 8.3% in June from a year earlier, beating an 8% forecast. The United Arab Emirates says a final deal with the OPEC Plus on its baseline level of oil production is yet to be reached. The clarification comes after reports that Riyadh and Abu Dhabi reached a compromise over crude output quotas. Brent oil prices fell on the news by as much as $1 per barrel. The UAE Energy Minister Suhail Al-Mazroui said deliberations and consultations between parties concerned are ongoing. Talks between OPEC and its allies, led by Russia, to boost oil production were abandoned earlier this month. Most OPEC Plus members supported a proposal to unwind the remaining cuts every month until the end of the next year. The UAE refused to endorse it unless its individual production quota was raised. The Wall Street stocks have dropped after the latest batch of quarterly corporate earnings report. The Labor Department data showed the new jobless claims fell 26,000 to a seasonally adjusted 360,000 rather. The Nasdaq Composite traded nearly 1% lower, while the S&P 500 also lost 0.25%, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up by a fraction. Meanwhile, the oil prices declined as investors braced for increased supplies. And now for weather updates, so we have Naila Shuja with us.
Thank you. We are going to start with Abu Dhabi, where it is expected to get extremely hot, with temperatures rising to 44 degrees Celsius. While in Amsterdam, the temperature is around 22 degrees Celsius with some cloudy weather. If we head to Ankara, the weather is mostly sunny with temperatures at 34 degrees Celsius. Now moving down under to Auckland, the sun is out, but the temperature is chilly at 16 degrees Celsius. Now, if you are traveling to Bangkok, the thunderstorms will get in the way of your plans. Temperatures there will be around 31 degrees Celsius. While in Beijing, there are clouds in the forecast with temperatures at 31 degrees Celsius. Now in Beirut will experience some mostly sunny weather with temperatures at 31 degrees Celsius. Berliners will experience a bit of cloudy weather with temperatures at 25 degrees Celsius. Now heading to Cairo, the hot sun will be excruciating with temperatures at 37 degrees Celsius. Down in Canberra, the weather rain is going to be keeping things chilly at 15 degrees Celsius. In Islamabad, the sun is out with temperatures rising to 34 degrees Celsius. While in Jakarta, the temperatures are steady at 31 degrees Celsius with some partial sun. Thank you. That's all for now. Back to you.
Naila, thank you for the weather updates. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.